London, spring of 1816. The drawing room of the Fairmont townhouse in Half Moon Street was suffused with the scent of neglect, its once elegant furnishings now threadbare, the gilt frames of family portraits harshly blemished by years of financial decay. Miss Eliza Fairmont stood before the rain-streaked window, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, and tried to ignore the raised voices echoing from her mother's study. At 23, Eliza had learned to make herself small, invisible, unobtrusive. She had perfected the art of becoming a shadow in her own home, moving through rooms without disturbing the air, speaking only when spoken to, dreaming only in the quiet hours before dawn when no one could accuse her of selfishness. Her father's death 6 years earlier had transformed their world from one of comfortable gentility to one of constant fear, and her mother had transformed with it. The study door opened with such force that it struck the wall, and Lady Margaret Fairmont emerged, her face set in lines of grim satisfaction. Behind her came a tall figure in immaculate black, a gentleman whose very presence seemed to command the air of the room. Eliza's breath caught as her mother's cold gaze fixed upon her. If stories of love that defies duty and transforms obligation into devotion move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. Eliza, her mother said, her voice sharp as January frost, come here at once. Lord Winterbourne has made us an offer that will save this family from ruin. Eliza moved forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body, her eyes lowered in the habitual posture of submission that her mother had drilled into her since childhood. She could feel the weight of the stranger's gaze upon her, assessing, measuring, judging her worth as one might examine livestock at market. Lord Dominic Carstairs, Earl of Winterbourne, was a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. At 34, he was known throughout the ton as a man of severe disposition, a widower who had retreated to his vast estate in Derbyshire 6 years earlier and rarely graced London society with his presence. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic planes, his eyes the color of storm clouds over the North Sea, his mouth set in a line that suggested he had forgotten how to smile. "Miss Fairmont," he said, his voice deep and carefully modulated, neither warm nor cold. "Your mother has explained your family's circumstances. I have agreed to settle all outstanding debts in exchange for your hand in marriage. I require an heir. You require financial security. It is a transaction that benefits both parties." A transaction. The words settled between them, a cold weight on Eliza's chest, confirming the stark reality. She forced herself to meet his eyes, searching for some hint of warmth, some indication that he saw her as more than a means to an end. She found nothing but careful neutrality, as if he were discussing the purchase of a horse or the terms of a business contract. "I understand, my lord," she heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excellent," Lady Margaret interjected, her tone brisk and businesslike. "The wedding will take place within the fortnight. Lord Winterbourne has been generous enough to arrange for a special license. There is no need for a lengthy engagement or elaborate ceremony. Simplicity will serve us best." The Earl inclined his head in acknowledgement, his gaze proscrutando Eliza's face. For a moment, something flickered in those gray eyes, something that might have been regret or perhaps apology, but it vanished so quickly that Eliza wondered if she had imagined it. "I shall call upon you tomorrow to discuss the settlements," Lord Winterbourne said, addressing Lady Margaret while his eyes remained fixed on Eliza. "Miss Fairmont, I hope you will find Winterbourne Hall to your liking. It is quite extensive, and I believe you will have everything you require for your comfort." Everything except choice, Eliza thought, but she merely nodded, her throat too tight for words. After the Earl departed, Lady Margaret turned to her daughter with an expression that brooked no argument. The afternoon light streaming through the dirty windows exposed shadows across her angular face, making her appear even more severe than usual. "You will marry him, Eliza. You will do your duty without complaint. Do you understand what this means? Without his intervention, I would be in debtor's prison within the month. Your father's gambling debts have haunted us for 6 years, and finally, mercifully, we have found our salvation." "Yes, mother," Eliza whispered. "And you will not indulge in foolish romantic notions," her mother continued, her voice growing sharper with each word. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford. Lord Winterbourne is a man of duty and responsibility. He is severe, proper, and expects obedience. You will be a wife in the truest sense, bearing him children and managing his household. You will not seek affection where none is offered. You will not burden him with emotional displays or demands for tenderness. Do I make myself clear?" Each word struck her like a shard of January ice, but Eliza kept her face carefully blank. She had learned long ago that showing emotion in her mother's presence only invited further criticism. "Yes, mother, perfectly clear." "Good. Now go to your chamber and consider yourself fortunate. Many women in your position would find themselves without any prospects whatsoever. Lord Winterbourne may be severe, but he is wealthy, titled, and respectable. That is more than you had any right to expect." That night, alone in her small chamber at the top of the house, Eliza allowed herself the luxury of tears. She pressed her face into her pillow to muffle the sounds of her sobbing, knowing that any display of emotion would earn her mother's sharp rebuke. She was being sold, traded like a commodity to pay for her father's sins, and she had no power to refuse. The rain drummed against her window in steady rhythm, as if the heavens themselves wept for her lost freedom. Her quiet grief held a strange sort of premonition. The Earl, for all his coldness, had seemed weighed by a profound and unrelenting unhappiness, as though already carrying a burden far heavier than his title. What kind of marriage awaited her in that distant estate in Derbyshire? Would Lord Winterbourne be cruel, or merely indifferent? Would she spend the rest of her days in silence, fulfilling her duties like a well-trained servant, never knowing warmth or kindness or the gentle touch of genuine affection? The following days passed in a blur of preparations that felt more like funeral arrangements than wedding plans. There would be no elaborate gown, no flowers, no celebration. Lady Margaret had arranged for a simple ceremony in a small chapel on the outskirts of London, with only the necessary witnesses in attendance. Eliza would wear her best day dress, a pale blue muslin that had been her father's favorite, and she would promise her life to a stranger who saw her as nothing more than a vessel for his heir. Lord Winterbourne called twice more before the wedding day, each visit brief and formal. He brought documents for Lady Margaret to sign, discussed financial arrangements in clipped business-like tones, and addressed Eliza with polite distance. He never smiled. He never asked her opinion. He simply observed her with those storm-gray eyes, as if memorizing her features for some future purpose she could not fathom. On the eve of her wedding, Eliza stood in her chamber and stared at her reflection in the small, tarnished mirror that hung above her washstand. Her face looked pale and drawn, her dark eyes too large in her thin face, her brown hair hanging in a simple plait down her back. She tried to imagine herself as the Countess of Winterbourne, mistress of a great estate, mother to noble children, but the image would not come. She could only see herself as she was now, a frightened girl being sent away to pay a debt she had not incurred. "You are stronger than you know," she whispered to her reflection, though she did not believe the words. "You will survive this. You have survived everything else." The wedding day dawned gray and cold, with a bitter wind that cut through even the thickest cloak. The chapel was small and austere, its stone walls bare of decoration, its wooden pews worn smooth by generations of worshippers. Lady Margaret arrived with Eliza in a hired carriage, her expression set in lines of grim satisfaction. Lord Winterbourne was already present, standing at the altar with his back rigid and his hands clasped behind him, flanked by his solicitor and a man Eliza did not recognize. The ceremony was mercifully brief. The clergyman spoke the words of the marriage service in a monotone voice, as if he had performed this ritual so many times that it had lost all meaning. Eliza repeated her vows in a voice that trembled despite her best efforts to remain composed. Lord Winterbourne's voice was steady and clear, but empty of emotion, as if he were reciting a legal contract rather than pledging his life to another human being. When the clergyman instructed them to join hands, Eliza felt the Earl's fingers close around hers. They were warm and strong, but his grip was careful, almost tentative, as if he feared crushing her. She dared to glance up at his face and found him watching her with an expression she could not interpret. Not coldness exactly, but something more complex, a carefully maintained neutrality that seemed to require great effort. "You may kiss the bride," the clergyman intoned. Lord Winterbourne hesitated for the briefest moment, then leaned down and pressed his lips to Eliza's forehead in a kiss so chaste and formal that it might have been bestowed upon a child. The touch was over almost before it began, leaving behind a curious warmth that faded quickly in the chill air of the chapel. And just like that, Eliza Fairmont ceased to exist. In her place stood Lady Winterbourne, countess and stranger to herself. The wedding breakfast was a dismal affair, held in a private room at a nearby inn. Lady Margaret spoke too loudly about her relief at settling her affairs, while Lord Winterbourne's solicitor discussed estate business in low tones with his employer. Eliza sat in silence, picking at the food on her plate, feeling as though she were watching the scene from a great distance. When the meal finally ended, Lord Winterbourne rose from his chair and addressed his new wife for the first time since the ceremony. "The carriage is prepared for our journey to Derbyshire. We should depart within the hour if we are to reach the first coaching inn before nightfall." "Of course, my lord," Eliza murmured, rising obediently. Lady Margaret embraced her daughter with surprising fierceness, though her words remained characteristically cold. "Remember what I told you," she hissed in Eliza's ear. "Duty before all else. Do not disappoint me." Then Eliza was being handed into an elegant traveling carriage, its interior lined with soft leather and smelling faintly of beeswax and tobacco. Lord Winterbourne entered after her and settled into the opposite seat, maintaining a careful distance between them. The door closed with a decisive thud, and the carriage lurched into motion. For the first hour of their journey, neither spoke. Eliza kept her gaze fixed on the passing scenery, watching as London's crowded streets yielded to the greener landscapes of the countryside. She was acutely aware of her new husband's presence, of the way he occasionally shifted in his seat, of the sound of his breathing in the confined space. It was Lord Winterbourne who finally broke the silence, his deep voice startling in its suddenness. "I trust you will find Winterbourne Hall comfortable. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, has prepared the Countess's apartments for your arrival. If there is anything you require, you need only ask." "Thank you, my lord," Eliza said quietly, still not looking at him. Another long pause stretched between them, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the horses' hooves on the road and the creaking of the carriage wheels. "Miss Fairmont," he said, then corrected himself. "Lady Winterbourne, I wish you to understand that I do not expect you to fulfill your marital duties immediately. You may have time to accustom yourself to your new circumstances before we address the matter of an heir." Eliza's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she forced herself to respond with the composure her mother had demanded. "You are very considerate, my lord." "I am practical," he replied, and there was something in his tone that might have been bitterness. "I have no desire to make this arrangement more difficult than necessary for either of us." What did that mean? Did he find her unattractive? Did he regret the marriage already? Eliza's hands twisted in her lap, crushing the fabric of her traveling cloak between nervous fingers. She wanted to ask him, wanted to demand some explanation for his coldness, but her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Do not burden him with emotional displays. The journey to Derbyshire took 2 full days, with a night spent at a coaching inn where Lord Winterbourne secured separate rooms for them both. He was unfailingly polite, ensuring that she had everything she needed, but he made no attempt at conversation beyond the strictly necessary. Eliza found herself lying awake in her solitary room, listening to the sounds of other travelers in the corridor, and wondering if her entire life would consist of this careful distance, this elaborate dance of propriety that kept them forever apart. On the afternoon of the second day, the carriage turned onto a long drive lined with ancient oak trees, their branches forming a canopy overhead that filtered the sunlight into patterns of gold and shadow. At the end of the drive, Winterbourne Hall rose before them like a monument to centuries of aristocratic power. The house was massive, built of gray stone that had weathered to the color of storm clouds, with countless windows that reflected the sky like blind eyes. Towers stood at each corner, and formal gardens spread out on either side, their geometric precision somehow more intimidating than beautiful. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. This was to be her home, this imposing fortress that looked more like a prison than a residence. How could she ever feel at ease within such walls? The carriage drew to a halt before the main entrance, and Lord Winterbourne descended first, then turned to offer his hand to Eliza. His grip was firm and steady as he helped her down, and for a moment their eyes met. She thought she saw something flicker in those gray depths, some emotion quickly suppressed, but then he released her hand and stepped back. "Welcome to Winterbourne Hall," he said formally. The household staff stood assembled in 2 neat rows in the entrance hall, waiting to greet their new mistress. The butler, a dignified man with silver hair named Henderson, bowed deeply. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, was a sturdy woman with kind eyes who curtsied and promised that everything had been prepared to Lady Winterbourne's liking. There were footmen and maids, a cook and various other servants whose names blurred together in Eliza's overwhelmed mind. Lord Winterbourne ushered her through a bewildering series of corridors, pointing out the principal rooms with the air of a guide conducting a tour of a museum. The morning room, the dining room with its table that could seat 30, the ballroom that clearly had not been used in years, its chandeliers shrouded in cloth, its mirrors dim with dust. The library, which stopped Eliza in her tracks with its floor-to-ceiling shelves laden with thousands of volumes. "You are welcome to use the library at any time," Lord Winterbourne said, and for the first time since she had met him, something in his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "My father was a collector of books. He believed that knowledge was the foundation of true nobility." "It is magnificent," Eliza breathed, her gaze traveling over the leather spines, the gilt lettering, the rolling ladders that provided access to the higher shelves. "I am pleased it meets with your approval. Now, if you will permit me, I shall show you to your apartments." The Countess's suite occupied the east wing of the house, a series of interconnected rooms that included a bedchamber, a dressing room, and a small sitting room. The furnishings were elegant, but impersonal, as if no one had truly inhabited these spaces in years. Heavy curtains and deep blue velvet hung at the windows. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the bedchamber, its canopy embroidered with the Winterbourne coat of arms. "The Earl's apartments adjoin yours through that door," Lord Winterbourne said, indicating a door in the far wall of the bedchamber. "It remains locked unless you wish otherwise. Your privacy will be respected absolutely." There was that word again. Privacy. Eliza was beginning to understand that Lord Winterbourne intended to maintain a marriage in name only, at least for the foreseeable future. Part of her felt relief, but another part, a part she barely acknowledged, felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been disappointment. "Mrs. Holloway will send a maid to help you dress for dinner," the Earl continued. "We dine at 7 o'clock. I hope you will join me in the dining room this evening, though if you are too fatigued from our journey, a tray can be sent to your rooms." "I shall join you, my lord," Eliza said quietly. He bowed, formal as always. "Then I shall see you this evening." After he departed, Eliza sank onto the edge of the enormous bed and looked around at the empty grandeur of her new surroundings. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of an ornate clock on the mantelpiece and the faint whisper of wind against the windows. She had never felt so alone in her life. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of her new lady's maid, a young woman named Mary, with a gentle manner and quick, efficient movements. Mary helped Eliza unpack her meager belongings, which looked pitifully small in the vast wardrobe, and then assisted her in preparing for dinner. "His lordship is a good man, my lady," Mary said, as she brushed out Eliza's hair. "Quiet, perhaps, and keeps much to himself, but he is fair to the servants and generous to the tenants. We all hope that your arrival will bring some light back to Winterbourne Hall. It has been too long since these walls have heard laughter." The comment surprised Eliza. "Has Lord Winterbourne been very unhappy, then?" Mary's hands paused for a moment, then resumed their work. "It is not my place to say, my lady, but a house knows when its master carries sorrow. The stones themselves seem to weep." That evening, Eliza made her way to the dining room with her heart beating uncomfortably fast. She had dressed in her best evening gown, a simple cream silk that had been made over from one of her mother's old dresses, and Mary had arranged her hair in a style that made her look older, more dignified. She wanted to make a good impression, though she could not have said exactly why it mattered. The dining room was exactly as intimidating as she had feared. The table stretched the length of the room, and Lord Winterbourne sat at its head, while a footman indicated that Eliza should sit at the opposite end, so far away that conversation would be nearly impossible. She took her seat feeling like a child playing dress-up in her parents' home, utterly out of place and overwhelmed by the formality of it all. The meal was served in near silence, course after course of exquisitely prepared food that Eliza could barely taste. Lord Winterbourne ate with methodical precision, occasionally making brief comments about the estate or the weather, to which Eliza responded with equally brief acknowledgments. They might have been strangers dining at separate tables for all the connection between them. When the final course had been cleared away, Lord Winterbourne rose from his chair. "I hope you found the meal satisfactory. I typically spend my evenings in my study attending to correspondence and estate matters. You are welcome to make use of the drawing room or the library as you see fit." "Thank you, my lord," Eliza said, feeling dismissed. He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something more, but then merely bowed and departed, leaving Eliza alone with the footman and the oppressive silence of the great house. That night, Eliza lay in her enormous bed and stared up at the embroidered canopy above her, fighting tears. This was her life now. This vast, cold house. This distant, formal man who was her husband in name only. This endless parade of silent meals and empty hours with nothing to fill them but the weight of duty and obligation. Her mother had been right. Love was a luxury they could not afford, and Eliza would have to learn to live without it. The days that followed settled into a pattern of careful routine. Eliza rose each morning and breakfasted alone in the morning room. Lord Winterbourne had already been up for hours, riding out to inspect the estate or closeted in his study with his steward. She spent her mornings exploring the house, discovering its many rooms and corridors, always with the sense that she was trespassing in a space that did not truly belong to her. The library became her refuge. She would spend hours there, pulling books from the shelves and losing herself in other worlds, other lives. She read Shakespeare and Milton, histories of ancient Rome, treatises on natural philosophy and astronomy. The breadth of the collection amazed her, and she wondered what kind of man Lord Winterbourne's father had been to have assembled such a treasure. Mrs. Holloway was kind, showing Eliza the workings of the household and introducing her to the various servants. The housekeeper seemed pleased to have a mistress again, someone to consult about menus and household arrangements, even if that mistress was too young and inexperienced to truly know what she was doing. "You'll learn, my lady," Mrs. Holloway assured her. "And you're always welcome to ask my advice. I've been at Winterbourne Hall for 30 years. I remember when his lordship was just a boy." "What was he like?" Eliza asked, curious despite herself. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "A serious child, even then. His mother died when he was quite young, and his father was not a demonstrative man. I think young Master Dominic learned early to keep his feelings locked away. But he was kind, my lady. Always kind to the servants, to the animals, to anyone weaker than himself." Eliza treasured this small glimpse into her husband's character, storing it away like a precious gem. If he had once been capable of kindness, perhaps that capacity still existed beneath his austere exterior. Lord Winterbourne maintained his pattern of careful distance. They met at dinner each evening, seated at opposite ends of that ridiculous table, exchanging pleasantries that meant nothing. He inquired after her comfort. She assured him that she had everything she needed. He mentioned matters of estate business. She listened politely. Neither spoke of anything personal, anything real. Yet sometimes Eliza caught him watching her with an expression she could not decipher. Once, when she was reading in the library and thought herself alone, she looked up to find him standing in the doorway, his gray eyes fixed upon her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The careful neutrality that had been his shield seemed, in that moment, to cost him a visible, internal price. When their gazes met, he turned away abruptly and left without a word. What did he see when he looked at her? Did he regret his choice? Did he find her lacking in some way? The uncertainty consumed her, but she dared not ask. Her mother's warning still echoed in her mind. Do not burden him with emotional displays. Do not seek affection where none is offered. 3 weeks after her arrival at Winterbourne Hall, everything changed. Eliza had retired to her bedchamber after another silent dinner, and Mary had helped her prepare for bed. She sat at her dressing table in her nightgown, brushing out her hair and thinking about the book she had been reading, when she heard a soft knock at the door that connected her chamber to Lord Winterbourne's apartments. Her heart leaped into her throat. The door had remained locked since her arrival, a physical barrier that symbolized the emotional distance between them. What could he want at this hour? "Come in," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The door opened, and Lord Winterbourne entered. He had removed his evening coat and cravat, and his shirt was open at the throat in a state of casual undress that Eliza had never seen before. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it, and his face was drawn with some emotion she could not identify. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice rough. "It is imperative that you understand something. I wish you to know that I do not see you as an obligation or a burden or a transaction, despite everything I have said and done to make you believe otherwise." He held out his hand, and Eliza saw that he was holding a small velvet box. She rose from her dressing table, her heart pounding, and approached him slowly. "What is it?" she asked. "Open it," he said simply. With trembling fingers, Eliza took the box and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of ivory silk, was a silver locket in the shape of a rose, its petals intricately detailed, its surface gleaming in the candlelight. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It belonged to my mother," Lord Winterbourne said quietly. "Not to my late wife. I want you to understand that distinction. This locket was my mother's most treasured possession. My father gave it to her on their wedding day, and she wore it every day of her life until she died." Eliza looked up at him, confused and overwhelmed. "My lord, I cannot accept something so precious." "You must," he insisted, and there was an urgency in his voice that she had never heard before. His hands, as he spoke, were not entirely steady. "Because I need you to understand something. I need you to know that I do not see you as an obligation or a burden or a transaction, despite everything I have said and done to make you believe otherwise." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their honesty. Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I find myself without words." Lord Winterbourne moved closer, and Eliza could see the tension in every line of his body, as if he were fighting some internal battle. "My mother believed that a home begins when someone asks how you feel rather than what you can offer. She believed that love is not a luxury, but a necessity, that without it, we are merely going through the motions of living without truly being alive." He reached out and took the locket from the box, then gestured for Eliza to turn around. She did so, her breath coming fast, and felt his fingers brush against the nape of her neck as he fastened the delicate chain. The touch was brief, but it sent shivers down her spine, awakening something she had not known existed. My first marriage was arranged, he continued, his voice low and close to her ear. Lady Margaret was from a powerful family, and our union was considered advantageous by all parties. But there was no affection between us, no companionship, no meeting of minds. We were strangers who shared a name and nothing more. When she died giving birth to a child who did not survive, I felt relief rather than grief. And that relief filled me with such shame that I swore I would never trap another person in a loveless marriage. Eliza turned to face him, her hand going to the locket at her throat. Then why did you marry me? His eyes met hers, and she saw anguish there, raw and unguarded. Because when I met you, I saw someone without choices, just as I had been without choices. Someone who had been told that duty was everything and that personal happiness was a frivolous indulgence. I saw myself in you, Eliza. And I thought that if I could give you nothing else, I could at least give you respect and space and the freedom to find some measure of peace within these walls. By keeping your distance, she whispered, by treating me like a stranger? I was afraid, he admitted, and the confession seemed to cost him greatly. During our wedding ceremony, I wanted to tell you that I would be kind, that I would never force you into anything you did not desire. But the words would not come. I feared that anything I said would sound like a command, like one more obligation I was imposing upon you. So I said nothing, and I kept my distance, thinking that silence was better than demands. Eliza's mind reeled. All this time, she had believed that his coldness was indifference or disdain, when in truth it had been a misguided attempt at kindness. You thought I wanted to be left alone? Did you not? He asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. Eliza hesitated, the gravity of the misunderstanding settling over her. Did you truly believe that my lack of freedom meant I desired only silence? Your mother made it clear that you understood this to be a marriage of convenience. I assumed you would prefer a husband who did not impose himself upon you, who allowed you to live your own life within the boundaries of propriety. A laugh escaped Eliza's lips, though it was tinged with bitterness. My lord, for 3 weeks I have believed that you regretted marrying me, that you found me disappointing or unworthy. I have spent every silent dinner wondering what I had done wrong. What flaw in my character made me unfit even for polite conversation? Lord Winterbourne's face paled. That was never my intention. Eliza, I swear to you, I have never found you disappointing. I have watched you these past weeks, seen how you treat the servants with kindness, how you lose yourself in books, how you move through these rooms with such grace and quiet dignity. You are remarkable. And I am the greatest fool in England for making you doubt that. The use of her given name struck her with unexpected force. It was the first time he had used it since their wedding day, and hearing it from his lips felt like a key turning in a lock, opening something that had been sealed shut. Why did you wait 3 weeks to tell me this? She asked. He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. I lacked the courage of an honest man. I feared that if I spoke honestly, I would reveal too much, would burden you with expectations you never agreed to shoulder. But tonight, as I sat alone in my study, I realized that silence is its own form of cruelty. My mother wore this locket every day because it reminded her that my father saw her as a person worthy of love, not merely a vessel for his heirs or an ornament for his home. I want you to wear it for the same reason. I want you to know that you are seen, Eliza. Truly seen. Eliza felt a familiar burning sensation yield to an intense, sweet ache in her breast. All her life, she had been invisible, a burden to be managed, a problem to be solved. Her father had loved her, but he had been weak and self-destructive, destroying their family with his gambling. Her mother had been cold and critical, teaching her that she had value only insofar as she fulfilled her duties without complaint. and she had come to this marriage believing that Lord Winterbourne saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. But here he stood, this severe, formal man, offering her the most precious thing he possessed, and speaking words that cracked open her carefully guarded heart. "I find myself without words," she whispered. "Say that you will allow me to begin again," Lord Winterbourne said earnestly. "Say that we can set aside these 3 weeks of misunderstanding and start anew, not as strangers bound by contract, but as two people trying to build something real from the ruins of expectation." Eliza reached up and touched the locket at her throat, feeling the warmth of the silver against her skin. "What if I told you that I do not want silence and distance? What if I told you that I want conversation and companionship, that I want to know the man I married rather than the mask he presents at dinner?" Something like hope flickered across Lord Winterbourne's face. "Then I would say that I want the same thing, more than I can express." "Then perhaps," Eliza said slowly, "we might begin by using given names when we are private. I cannot continue to call you my lord when you have just given me your mother's locket and bared your soul." "Dominic," he said, and the name sounded strange and intimate in the quiet of her chamber. "My name is Dominic." "Dominic," she repeated, tasting the syllables. "It suits you better than all your titles." A smile, the first genuine smile she had seen from him, transformed his face from austere to almost beautiful. "And you are Eliza, not Lady Winterbourne, not my wife in the abstract. Eliza, who reads philosophy and history in the library, who treats the servants with more kindness than most nobles show their peers, who brushes her hair by candlelight and looks like a painting come to life." The compliment made her blush, but she did not look away. "If we are to begin again, Dominic, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," he said without hesitation. "Promise me that you will always tell me how you truly feel, even if the truth is difficult. Promise me that we will not hide behind propriety and distance when honesty might serve us better. I have spent my entire life being told what I should feel and how I should behave. I do not want that from you. I want the truth, whatever it may be." Dominic took her hands in his, and the warmth of his touch sent a powerful, grounding tremor through her entire body. "I promise you honesty, Eliza, even when it frightens me, even when I do not know how to put feelings into words. I promise to try." "Then I promise the same," she said softly. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, eyes locked, and Eliza felt something shift in the space between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was possibility. It was the first fragile shoots of trust pushing up through frozen ground, reaching toward the light. "It is late," Dominic said eventually, though he made no move to release her hands. "You should rest, but tomorrow, if you are willing, I would like to show you the estate. Not as a formal tour, but as a chance for us to talk, to learn about one another." "I would like that," Eliza said, and meant it with her whole heart. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed them with a reverence that made her breath catch. "Good night, Eliza. Sleep well." "Good night, Dominic." After he departed, returning to his own chambers through the connecting door, Eliza returned to her dressing table and looked at her reflection. The locket gleamed at her throat, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears and newfound hope. She touched the silver rose with gentle fingers and thought about the woman who had worn it before her, a woman who believed that love was not a luxury, but a necessity. Perhaps her mother had been wrong. Perhaps love was not something to be set aside in favor of duty. Perhaps the two could exist together, intertwined like the petals of the rose at her throat. For the first time since her wedding day, Eliza allowed herself to imagine a future that held more than mere survival. She allowed herself to hope. The following morning dawned clear and bright, with sunlight streaming through Eliza's windows and birds singing in the ancient trees surrounding the hall. She rose earlier than usual, her heart fluttering with anticipation, and allowed Mary to help her dress. "You look happy this morning, my lady," Mary observed with a smile. "It does my heart good to see it." "I feel happy," Eliza admitted, touching the locket that she had not removed even for sleep. "I believe things are beginning to change." Dominic was waiting for her in the breakfast room, dressed for riding in buckskin breeches and a dark coat. He rose when she entered, and his smile when he saw her was warm and genuine. "Good morning, Eliza. I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she said, taking the seat beside him rather than at the far end of the table. This small act of rebellion against the formality of their previous meals felt momentous, and she saw approval flash across his face. They ate breakfast together, and for the first time, their conversation flowed naturally. Dominic told her about the estate, about the tenant farmers and the village that lay beyond the manor's gates, about his plans for improvements to the land and better housing for the workers. Eliza asked questions and offered her own thoughts, and he listened to her with genuine interest, treating her opinions as valuable rather than dismissing them as the frivolous notions of an ignorant girl. "You care deeply for the people who depend on you," she observed. "My father taught me that a title is not a right, but a responsibility," Dominic replied. "The land and its people were here long before I was born, and they will be here long after I am gone. I am merely a steward for a brief time, and I want to leave things better than I found them." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. This was a man of principle and conscience, not the cold, unfeeling lord she had initially believed him to be. After breakfast, Dominic escorted her to the stables, where 2 horses stood saddled and ready. Eliza's mare was a gentle chestnut with kind eyes, while Dominic's stallion was a magnificent black beast that stamped and snorted with barely contained energy. "I should have asked if you ride," Dominic said, suddenly looking concerned. "If you prefer, we can take the carriage." "I ride," Eliza assured him. "My father taught me when I was a girl, before things became difficult. I have not had many opportunities in recent years, but I have not forgotten." They rode out together, leaving the formal gardens behind and following a path that wound through parkland and into the deeper countryside beyond. The morning air was fresh and cool, carrying the scents of grass and wildflowers and the rich earth of newly plowed fields. Eliza felt her spirits lift with each stride of the horse beneath her, as if she were shedding layers of confinement with every mile they traveled from the house. Dominic proved himself an adept guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land. He showed her the ancient oak tree where village children played, the stream where trout could be caught in summer, the ruins of an old abbey that had stood since medieval times. But more than that, he talked to her as an equal, asking her thoughts and listening to her responses with genuine attention. "What did you most love to read as a child?" he asked at one point. "Fairy tales," she admitted. Stories of transformation and enchantment where the downtrodden heroine discovers she is more than she believed herself to be. My father would read them to me before bed, doing all the voices and making me laugh. After he died, my mother forbade such books. She said they filled girls' heads with dangerous notions of romance and rescue. "And what do you think now?" Dominic asked gently. "Were they dangerous?" Eliza considered the question carefully. "I think they gave me hope when I might otherwise have despaired. Not hope for rescue by a prince, but hope that circumstances could change, that transformation was possible. In the darkest times, when my mother's criticisms felt unbearable, I would remember those stories and tell myself that my current situation was not my permanent condition." "You were right," Dominic said quietly. "You were only 34 then. Circumstances did change. You escaped." "Did I?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Or was my exchange of the Half Moon Street drawing room for Winterbourne Hall merely a shift from one gilded cage to another?" He reined in his horse and turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Do you feel imprisoned here?" "I did," she said honestly. "For those first 3 weeks, these beautiful rooms felt like a gilded cage. But now, after last night, after this morning, I feel as though the door to that cage is opening. I do not yet know what lies beyond it, but I am beginning to believe that I might be free to discover it. Dominic guided his horse closer to hers, close enough that their legs nearly touched. I want you to be free, Eliza. I want you to make decisions about the household, to pursue interests that engage your mind, to hold agency in your own life and be mistress of your own time. Will you allow me to give you that? On one condition, she said, meeting his eyes. That you accept the same freedom, that you do not bind yourself to some rigid code of lordly behavior that prevents you from being fully human. I have seen glimpses of the man beneath the title Dominic, and I want to know him better. But that can only happen if you allow yourself to be known. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, heedless of propriety or the possibility of servants observing from the distant house. Then we have a bargain. Freedom for both of us and honesty as its foundation. They continued their ride, and the conversation flowed more easily than Eliza would have believed possible just days earlier. Dominic divulged details about his childhood, about the loneliness of growing up in the great house with a grieving father and no siblings. He spoke of his years at Oxford, where he delved deeply into philosophy and history and discovered that the world was far more complex than the rigid society of his birth had suggested. I wanted to travel, he confessed, to see Italy and Greece, to stand among the ruins of ancient civilizations and understand what they might teach us about how to live. But my father became ill, and I had to return to manage the estate. Then came the arranged marriage, and then his death, and by the time I was free of obligations, I no longer had the heart for adventure. It is not too late, Eliza said impulsively. You are only 34. The world is still there, waiting. He smiled, but there was sadness in it. Perhaps, but I have responsibilities here that I cannot abandon. Not abandon, she pressed, but perhaps we might find ways to bring the world to Winterbourne Hall. Books and art and music and discourse with people who have seen beyond England's borders. There are ways to expand one's horizons without leaving home. Dominic looked at her with something like wonder. You are remarkable, do you know that? You have been here less than a month, and already you are dreaming of ways to transform this place. I learned something from those fairy tales after all, she said with a small smile. Transformation is possible, but it requires courage and imagination. They rode back to the house as the sun climbed toward its zenith, and when they dismounted in the stable yard, Dominic kept hold of her hand a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for this morning, he said quietly. I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed anyone's company so thoroughly. Nor can I, Eliza admitted. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged at Winterbourne Hall. Dominic and Eliza took breakfast together each morning, then spent the morning hours attending to their respective duties. But the afternoons were theirs, and they used them to continue what had begun during that first ride, the slow, careful process of learning to know one another. They walked in the gardens and talked about philosophy and politics. They sat in the library while Dominic introduced her to his favorite books, and she shared her thoughts on what she read. They visited tenant families together, and Eliza saw how gently Dominic treated even the poorest cottagers, how he listened to their concerns and worked tirelessly to address their needs. The evening dinners evolved from formal performances to genuine conversations. The long table was abandoned in favor of a smaller one in a more intimate dining room, where they sat close enough to actually speak without shouting. They discovered shared interests and friendly disagreements. Dominic had a subtly ironic wit that emerged once he felt comfortable enough to express it, and Eliza found herself laughing more than she had in years. But beneath the growing friendship lay something more complex, something neither of them quite knew how to address. Eliza found herself noticing things about Dominic that had nothing to do with intellectual compatibility. The strength of his hands as he helped her mount her horse, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the warmth of his body when they stood close together, examining a book in the library. And she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her pulse quicken, a hunger quickly masked but unmistakable. They were married, but they had not yet truly become husband and wife. The door between their chambers remained open now, but neither had crossed that threshold. It was as if they had made an unspoken agreement to let trust build slowly, to ensure that when they finally came together, it would be a choice made freely by both, not an obligation fulfilled out of duty. One evening, as summer arrived in full and the days grew long and warm, Eliza sat in the library working on a piece of embroidery while Dominic read aloud from a volume of poetry. His deep voice gave life to the words, and she found herself more enchanted by the resonance of him than by the verses themselves. "What are you thinking?" he asked, setting the book aside and regarding her with curiosity. She set down her embroidery and met his gaze. "I am thinking that I am happy, truly happy, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. And I am thinking how strange that is, given that this marriage began as a transaction designed to save my mother from debtor's prison." Dominic rose from his chair and came to sit beside her on the settee, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Eliza, I must ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Always," she promised. "Do you feel any affection for me?" The vulnerability in his voice was painful to hear. "Or am I merely a comfortable situation, preferable to the alternatives, but not something you would have chosen if circumstances had been different?" The question struck at the essence of everything that had been building between them, and Eliza knew that her answer would shape the entire future of their marriage. She thought carefully before speaking, wanting to give him the truth he had requested. "When I first met you, I was terrified," she said slowly. "You seemed so cold, so severe, and I believed you saw me as nothing more than an obligation. But as I have come to know you, as you have shown me kindness and respect and genuine interest in my thoughts and feelings, something has changed. I look forward to our mornings together. I find myself thinking about you when we are apart, wondering what you are doing, hoping you will seek me out. When you smile at me, I feel a warmth that spreads through my entire body. Is that affection?" "I believe it is. But it feels like more than that, Dominic. It feels like the beginning of something deeper." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I was so afraid," he confessed. "Afraid that you would never see me as anything but the man who bought you to pay your mother's debts. I have tried so hard to give you reasons to like me, to prove that I am more than the cold lord you first encountered. But I have been terrified to push too hard, to demand too much, to risk destroying this fragile connection we have built." "You could never demand too much from me," Eliza said softly, "because what we have given each other is freely offered, not extracted through coercion. You have given me respect, companionship, and the freedom to discover who I am beyond my mother's expectations. In return, I offer you the same. My heart belongs to you, if you want it." "Oh, what is that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My heart," she said simply. "It is not much, perhaps. It has been battered and bruised by years of being told it had no value. But it is healing now, and it is learning to feel joy again, and it knows instinctively that it wants to belong to you." The look on Dominic's face was one of such profound emotion that it took Eliza's breath away. Without words, he reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "Eliza," he said, her name a prayer on his lips, "may I kiss you? Not as a formality or a duty, but because I want to, because I have wanted to for weeks, but feared you would not welcome it?" "Yes," she breathed. "Please, yes." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, but she remained still, her eyes falling closed in anticipation. When his lips finally met hers, it was not the chaste salutation of their wedding day. This was a real kiss, tender and searching, a question and an answer all at once. Eliza's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. She kissed him back with a fervor that surprised them both, pouring into the gesture all the longing and hope and affection that had been building inside her since the night he had given her his mother's locket. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I did not mean to fall in love with you. I had convinced myself that such feelings were dangerous, that they led only to pain and disappointment. But you have shown me that I was wrong. Love is not the luxury your mother claimed it to be. It is the very essence of what makes life worth living. I also love you deeply," Eliza whispered, the admission feeling like the most important truth she had ever spoken. "I did not think it was possible to love someone I had been forced to marry. But you have taught me that love is not about circumstances. It is about choice. And I choose you, Dominic. Every day I choose you." He kissed her again, and this time there was passion in it, a hunger that had been restrained for too long. Eliza felt herself responding with equal intensity, her body stirring with new, vibrant life. When Dominic pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire. "Eliza," he said, his voice rough, "I want you to understand that we do not have to consummate this marriage tonight. We can continue as we have been, taking our time, ensuring that you are ready." She shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. "I am ready, Dominic. I have been ready since the morning we rode together and you asked me about my freedom. But I wanted to be certain that when this happened, it would not be obligation or duty. I wanted it to be love." "It is love," he assured her, rising and extending his hand to help her to her feet. "It is absolutely love." He led her from the library, through the corridors of the great house, up the stairs to the family apartments. When they reached the door to her chambers, he paused and looked at her with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. "Are you certain?" he asked one last time. "I have never been more certain of anything," she replied. They entered her chambers together, and as the door closed behind them, Eliza felt the last barriers between them finally crumble. What followed was tender and passionate and utterly transformative. Dominic was gentle and attentive, ensuring her comfort and pleasure above his own. And Eliza discovered that there was joy to be found in physical intimacy when it was founded on genuine affection and mutual respect. Afterward, they lay entwined in her bed, the candles burning low and the night air carrying the scent of roses from the garden through the open window. Dominic held her close, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder, and Eliza felt more content than she had ever dreamed possible. "Do you know what I was thinking during our wedding ceremony?" Dominic asked quietly. "Tell me," she murmured. "I was thinking that you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and that I was the worst sort of villain for forcing you into this arrangement. I was thinking that I would spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for my selfishness. I never imagined that we might find this, that we might find each other." "My mother was wrong," Eliza said softly. "Love is not a luxury. It is not something to be set aside in favor of duty. It is the thing that makes duty bearable, that transforms obligation into devotion." "Your mother was wrong about many things," Dominic agreed. "But she was right about one thing, though perhaps not in the way she intended." "What was that?" "She said that this was a transaction that would save your family, and she was right. But it was not your mother's family that was saved, it was mine. This house was dying, Eliza. I was dying, though I did not realize it until you arrived and began to breathe life back into these cold stones. You saved me." Eliza turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "Then we saved each other. And we will continue to save each other, every day, through choice and love and the courage to be honest even when it frightens us." "Every day," he agreed, and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of promises made and kept. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since coming to Winterbourne Hall, Eliza did not feel alone. The months that followed were marked by a transformation that was visible to everyone at Winterbourne Hall. The house itself seemed to reawaken, as if the stones themselves responded to the love growing within them. Rooms that had been closed for years were reopened. The ballroom was cleaned and polished, and though they did not host grand balls, Dominic and Eliza would sometimes dance there alone, laughing as they improvised steps. The library expanded as Dominic ordered new books on subjects that interested Eliza. They established a small lending library in the village, so that the tenant farmers and their children might also have access to learning, an act which Dominic linked to his father's progressive belief that knowledge formed the foundation of true nobility. Eliza started a school for the village girls, teaching them to read and cipher, much to the delight of their grateful parents. Dominic consulted Eliza on all matters relating to the estate, valuing her insights on everything from crop rotation to improvements in worker housing. She proved to have a natural head for business and a compassionate heart for people, and together they made changes that improved life for everyone who lived on Winterbourne lands. The servants noticed the change in their master and mistress. Henderson the butler remarked to Mrs. Holloway that he had not seen his lordship smile so much in all the years he had known him. Mrs. Holloway agreed, adding that her ladyship had brought light and laughter back to a house that had been in shadow for too long. Lady Margaret, meanwhile, continued to send stiff, infrequent missives from London, confirming her ongoing solitary existence, never quite acknowledging the true happiness her daughter had found. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn gold and crimson, Eliza realized that she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed. But when a second month passed and she began to feel ill in the mornings, she knew she could no longer keep the possibility to herself. She chose to tell Dominic one evening as they sat together in the small parlor that had become their favorite retreat. A fire crackled in the hearth against the October chill, and they were reading companionably, her head resting against his shoulder. "Dominic," she said softly, setting aside her book, "I need to tell you something." He looked at her with immediate concern. "What is it? Are you unwell? You have been pale lately." "I am not unwell," she assured him. "At least, not in the way you mean. But I believe I may be with child." For a moment he simply stared at her, as if the words had not quite penetrated. Then his face transformed with such joy that Eliza felt tears spring to her eyes. "Truly?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Eliza, are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a physician's confirmation. But all the signs are there." Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly that she could barely breathe. "This is the greatest gift you could ever give me," he said, his voice muffled against her hair. "Not because of the air I require, though that matters, but because it is a child born of love, not duty. A child who will grow up knowing that their parents chose each other, that they were wanted and cherished. Our child will never doubt their worth," Eliza promised. "They will never be made to feel like a burden or an obligation. We will teach them that love is not a luxury, but a necessity, that kindness matters more than titles, that how one feels is as important as what one does." They sat together by the fire, Dominic's hand resting gently on her still flat stomach, and talked about the future. They discussed names and nurseries and whether they hoped for a son or daughter. Dominic admitted that he hoped for a daughter first, so that she might have her mother's intelligence and compassion. Eliza laughed and said she hoped for a son who would grow up with his father's integrity and hidden warmth. As winter settled over Derbyshire, covering Winterbourne Hall in a blanket of pristine snow, Eliza's pregnancy progressed. The physician was summoned and confirmed what she already knew. He assured them that she was healthy and strong, and that he anticipated no complications. Dominic became even more attentive than usual, insisting that she rest frequently and not overtax herself. Eliza tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing that it came from love rather than a desire to control her. They spent the long winter evenings together, planning improvements to the nursery, reading books about child rearing, and dreaming about the family they were creating. On a particularly cold evening in late December, as snow fell softly outside the windows and the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, Dominic presented Eliza with a small wrapped package. "Another gift?" she asked with a smile. "You spoil me terribly." "Open it," he urged. Inside the wrapping was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting to be filled. On the first page, in Dominic's elegant script, were written these words: "For Eliza, who taught me that transformation is possible when we have the courage to choose love. May you fill these pages with your thoughts, your dreams, and your truths." Eliza ran her fingers over the inscription, deeply moved. "It is perfect. Thank you. I want our child to know you as I have come to know you," Dominic explained, "not just as their mother, but as a woman of depth and intelligence and remarkable courage. Write for them, Eliza. Write about your journey from that cold drawing room in Half Moon Street to this warm home we have built together. Write about transformation and choice and the power of love to change everything." That night, Eliza made her first entry in the journal. She wrote about her father's death and her mother's coldness. She wrote about the day Lord Winterbourne had appeared like a specter, offering salvation at the cost of her freedom. She wrote about the weeks of isolation and misunderstanding, and then about the night everything changed when Dominic gave her the silver locket and spoke to her with honesty for the first time. She wrote, "I have learned that love is not a luxury to be set aside in favor of duty. Love transforms duty from burden to a blessing. My mother was wrong. The greatest gift we can give ourselves and our children is the courage to feel deeply, to choose deliberately, and to honor the humanity in ourselves and others." The winter passed, and spring returned to Derbyshire. Eliza's body grew round with their child, and Dominic marveled at the changes, treating her with such reverence that she sometimes had to remind him she was not an object of fragile glass. On a warm April morning, with the windows of her chamber open to let in the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of birdsong, Eliza's labor began. Dominic paced outside the door, refusing to leave despite the midwife's assurances that all was proceeding normally. When the baby's first cry rang out, he burst into the room without waiting for permission. Eliza lay exhausted but radiant in her bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft linen. She looked up at Dominic with tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy. "We have a daughter," she said softly, "a perfect, beautiful daughter." Dominic approached the bed with almost comical caution, as if afraid he might disturb some sacred moment. When Eliza pulled back the linen to reveal their daughter's face, tiny and red, and already making her displeasure at the world known through lusty cries, he felt his own eyes fill with tears. "May I hold her?" he asked. "Of course," Eliza said, carefully transferring the baby into his arms. Dominic looked down at his daughter, this tiny person who was half him and half the woman he loved more than life itself, and felt something shift irrevocably in his heart. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise you that you will always be loved. You will always be seen. You will always matter." The baby stopped crying and opened her eyes, fixing him with a solemn gaze. "She is wise already," Eliza said with a tired laugh. "She has your eyes, Dominic." "And your strength," he replied. "What shall we name her?" They had discussed many names over the winter months, but in that moment, Eliza knew with perfect certainty what their daughter should be called. "Hope," she said. "We shall name her Hope, because she represents everything we hoped for and never dared to believe we might find." "Hope Carstairs," Dominic said, testing the name. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect." He returned the baby to Eliza's arms and sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife and the other gently touching his daughter's soft hair. They sat that way for a long time, the three of them, a family born not of obligation, but of choice and courage, and the transformative power of love freely given. Outside the window, the gardens of Winterbourne Hall bloomed with new life, and inside its ancient walls, a new chapter was beginning. 3 years later, on an evening in early summer, Eliza sat in the drawing room with her journal open before her. Hope was asleep in the nursery upstairs, tired from an afternoon of playing in the garden. A second child, a son they had named after Dominic's father, slept peacefully in a cradle near the fireplace. The house was quiet, filled with that particular peace that comes when a day has been well spent and loved ones are safe and content. Dominic entered the room and came to stand behind her chair, his hands resting gently on her shoulders as he looked at what she was writing. "Still working on the story of us?" he asked with a smile. "Always," she replied. "I want them to understand, when they are old enough to read this, what it means to choose love even when circumstances seem to make it impossible." He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "Come walk with me in the garden," he suggested. "The roses are in bloom, and the evening is too beautiful to waste indoors." Eliza set aside her journal and took his offered hand. They walked together through the corridors of Winterbourne Hall, past portraits of stern ancestors, and through rooms that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like home. They stepped out into the garden, where the roses her mother-in-law had loved filled the air with their sweet perfume. The silver locket still hung around Eliza's neck, as it did every day. She touched it now, thinking about the woman who had believed that a home begins when someone asks how you feel, rather than what you can offer. "Do you remember the day you gave me this?" she asked Dominic. "I remember everything about that day," he said. "I was terrified that you would reject my gift and confirm all my fears that I had trapped you in a loveless marriage. Instead, you freed me," Eliza said softly. "You freed both of us." They stood together in the garden as the sun set behind the ancient trees, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the estate they tended together thrived. And between them existed a love that had been born of duty and desperation, but had grown into something profound and enduring. "I used to believe that love was a luxury I could not afford," Eliza said, her hand finding Dominic's. "But you taught me that love is what makes everything else possible. It is the foundation upon which we build our lives, the force that transforms obligation into joy." "And you taught me," Dominic replied, pulling her close, "that it is never too late to begin again. That even the coldest heart can learn to feel warmth. That choosing to be vulnerable is not weakness, but the greatest courage of all." They stood together as the stars began to emerge overhead, two people who had been forced together by circumstance and had chosen to stay together by love. Their story had not followed the path of fairy tales, with rescue and instant devotion. Instead, it had been slower, more complicated, more real. But it had been theirs, and they had made it beautiful through choice and honesty and the daily work of seeing each other truly. "What shall we tell Hope and Marcus when they ask how we fell in love?" Eliza wondered aloud. Dominic smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had become so familiar to her over the years. "We shall tell them the truth, that love is not always a lightning strike or a fairy tale. Sometimes it is a slow dawn, a gradual awakening to the presence of someone who has been beside you all along, waiting patiently to be seen. We shall tell them that we chose each other, not once, but every day, and that those daily choices are what built the love we share." "And we shall tell them," Eliza added, "that their mother was wrong when she said love was a luxury. We shall teach them that love is as necessary as air and water, that without it we merely exist rather than truly live. And we shall show them, through our example, what it means to create a home founded not on duty and obligation, but on respect, kindness, and the courage to feel deeply." Dominic kissed her then, a long, tender kiss that spoke of all the years behind them and all the years still to come. When they finally broke apart, He took her hand and led her back toward the house, toward the children who waited for them, toward the life they had built together from the ruins of expectation and despair. The windows of Winterbourne Hall glowed with warm light in the gathering darkness, beacons of home and hope. And within those walls, two people who had once been strangers bound by transaction had become partners joined by love, proving that transformation is always possible for those brave enough to choose it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story of transformation and choosing love touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope.